to build willpower, as David Goggins will call it, a callus. You want to callus your mind, a brain callus. You want to just toughen up.
But what's interesting about this brain area is there's now a lot of data showing that when people do something they don't want to do, this brain area gets bigger.
Resistance of life, lean into it. Because I really think that when you lean into the resistance of life, you end up getting a tremendous amount of assistance. How does the person that maybe is in a more compromised position, how do they get started? It could start on something as simple as a walk. Say to yourself in your head, I've always called these bullets. People give you like fuel. They give you like bullets for your gun when they say something negative to you. I'm going to write that down and we'll see. 3 years from now, 4 years from now, you might be right now, but I'm going to make you wrong 5 years from now. I recently was on Bradley Martin's show, and I think it would be great for us to discuss some of the things that we talked about on there, highlight the show. Bradley, I thought he did a great job interviewing me. He was able to pull some deep thoughts out of me, which I thought was pretty cool. And then those of you that watch it, you're going to see it gets real emotional because unfortunately, Bradley had a family member that killed himself that was his father. And I had a family member that killed himself as well, in my brother. And so we went through some of that for a little bit, and things got a little murky for a little while, got emotional. But it was a great show, and I just want to share with you guys today this idea of what it can really do for you when you go through things that are difficult, and you go through not necessarily like hard times, not necessarily those kinds of things, but when you choose things to be difficult, when you choose to go on a run and you're not used to running and you hate running, or you choose to turn your shower to cold for the last 30 seconds when you absolutely hate the cold. When you choose some of these things that we really, really don't like, we have a clip from Andrew Huberman as well that we'll share with you guys, but I'd like to share this clip in my conversation with Bradley Martin, talking about getting yourself through some difficult struggles, some difficult friction. And in this case, I'm talking about resistance. And in my phone, it says resistance of life, and it just says lean into it. Because I really think that when you lean into the resistance of life, you end up getting a tremendous amount of assistance. And kind of neat that knuckleheads and meatheads like myself and other people, obviously, and David Goggins, probably the king of it, have kind of already discovered these things, in an unscientific way. We understand that doing these things not only prepares you for harder things in the particular thing that you're doing, like in the case of lifting. When you lift, you build a tolerance for lifting, and you build a capacity to lift more and more weight over time. And you're able to do what? You're able to handle more stress. You're able to handle more work. And this is something I identified, for myself with lifting, and then it just snowballed and turned into kind of a tsunami of a lot of other really cool things that I've been able to do and accomplish in my life. And it just feels amazing. And so some of the message that I'm trying to share so often with people is I'm just kind of hoping that people can just maybe just capture just a little tiny bit of how I feel almost every single day. I feel really good. I enjoy the things that I do. I have a lot of fun with them. And I might be overzealous sometimes and overfired up, and maybe that comes off to you in a negative way or something like that. But I just love sharing this stuff. And again, I would love for people to be able to feel some of the enthusiasm that I feel from lifting, running, and getting through some of these difficult things.
Moves obviously are the right moves, and some aren't the right moves. And it's just like this whole thing of life is like, how are we making sure we're making the right moves? And I guess ultimately you can't always make sure you make the right moves. It's just kind of what you know to that point, how much you know to that point. It's interesting. I guess when I start talking about stuff like this, I'm just like, how do you make things better for people who maybe they're at a point in their life where they don't think it could be better because they haven't reached that perspective that it could yet?
I think it needs to have like some stickiness to it. It needs to like resonate with them in some way. Something that I think everybody has it within themselves to do something hard and difficult, and to get themselves to kind of breathe hard and work hard it might look different from one person to the next. But that's what I'm obsessed with, is like, how do I get people, you know, I feel like I'm screaming from a mountaintop sometimes, and maybe sometimes I come off the wrong way, but I would love for people to feel what it feels like to pick up a heavy deadlift and to shake with it and then to finish it.
Yeah.
Your body tells you not to do it. Your brain tells you not to do it. And sometimes it's like a 1, 2, 3 count until the weight even moves off the ground. And your body's like, no, dude, don't. Your brain's telling you don't.
Yeah.
But all the training is the accumulation of you being able to do that. I don't know how to get people to that point, because a lot of people are so far on the other side that they feel paralyzed.
Well,
yeah, you know, I think you have to be willing to try things in the first place. You have to be willing to try, especially new things that are novel, things that are new. I've shared many times in this show before how I got started with running, but I'll share it again because I think it's important. It started out just by walking. I was walking for a long time. Jesse Burdick was somebody that would help coach me with powerlifting. And he was like, man, he's like, you got to do like at least a little cardio, you know? Like, we're both like big and heavy, and like we're a little too fat and sweaty, you know? And so I was like, I hate being like on elliptical or treadmill. I hate all that stuff, man. It's just, I don't know. He's like, well, it'd be good to get outside and just like go on a walk. And so I started doing that. And occasionally I would wear like a weighted vest or something. And other times I would just do like kind of a normal walk. But when you start weighing over 300 pounds, you don't really need a weighted vest at that point. And so anyway, I just did a lot of walking. And then over time, I went on a diet and started to lose some weight and started to shift gears with some of my goals and stuff like that. I was on a walk one day and I was like, I feel pretty good. I'm going to just like jog a little bit. And that's what I did, is I just jogged. And I didn't run. I jogged. I just went very slow. And I was like, I'm going to run to that stop sign over there. And then I walked. And I jogged again. And I repeated this. And I did it probably like 5 times within maybe a 2-mile walk jog that I did. And then a couple days later, you know, I did it again. And I remember specifically saying to myself, there's probably not going to be a time where I run this whole thing because it's just too far and it's probably too challenging and there's probably no point in it, you know? And sometimes I think we have the tendency to think that. Like, for example, with the cold plunge. You know, a lot of science shows that like, you know, under 50 degrees or under 55 degrees, you get a lot of the benefits of the cold. And there's no reason to lower that temperature any further. But there is a reason. And the reason is to build willpower. And the reason is to build resilience and to build kind of this mental toughness, as David Goggins will call it. He'll often talk about it being like a callus. You want to callus your mind, a brain callus. And you want to just toughen up, you know, over time. And so with running, with lifting, with cold plunging, with sauna, with like any of these things that you can think of, even just like studying. I mean, shit, it could be anything. It could be playing a guitar, playing a piano, it could be writing, literally anything. When you start to not only do the thing, like you like writing, but when you're not only just writing and practicing writing, you go outside of that and start to study stuff that is still probably going to help you with writing, that is not something that you love. Maybe now instead of like writing fiction, maybe now you're writing, I don't know, poetry or something. You know, so you're writing something way different than what you're used to. You hate it, but that practice is going to literally expand your mind. And over time, it's going to make you more powerful in everything. And it's just a really weird, kind of interesting thing. But we have a clip that we're going to share with you guys where Dr. Huberman, Andrew Huberman, he explains it in detail. And it's kind of funny because he's explaining it to David Goggins. And, you know, David Goggins just has this big old smile on his face. He's like, I know, motherfucker. You know, he doesn't say that, but like, you know that's what he's thinking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because he's like, cool, you're saying all the scientific like terminology, but this has been my life for like ever, right? And it is funny, like his little smirk on his face when he's like,
yeah, Huberman's kind of like, yeah, I just learned this recently. And,
yeah.
And I think Goggins is like, hey, welcome to the party, buddy. Let's play this clip.
I'm going to share a little neuroscience tidbit.
Love it.
But I think it's one that you'll appreciate. Most people don't know this, but there's a brain structure called the anterior mid-cingulate cortex. As we pointed out before, that's a noun, it's a name, it doesn't mean anything. Right. We could call it the cookie monster.
Right.
But what's interesting about this brain area is there are now a lot of data in humans, not some mouse study, showing that when people do something they don't want to do, like add 3 hours of exercise per day or per week, or when people who are trying to diet and lose weight resist eating something.
Right.
When people do anything that and this is the important part, that they don't want to do.
Right.
It's not about adding more work, it's about adding more work that you don't want to do.
Yes.
This brain area gets bigger.
Yep.
Now here's what's especially interesting about this brain area to me. And by the way, I'm only learning this recently because it's new data, but there's a lot of it. The anterior mid-cingulate cortex is smaller in obese people.
Damn.
It gets bigger when they diet. It's larger in athletes. It's especially large or grows larger in people that see themselves as challenged and overcome some challenge.
Right.
And in people that live a very long time, this area keeps its size. In many ways, scientists are starting to think of the anterior mid-cingulate cortex not just as one of the seats of willpower,
Right.
but perhaps actually the seat of the will to live.
Holy shit.
Now we're talking.
And when I learned about the anterior mid-cingulate cortex, I was like almost out of my seat. And I've been in the neuroscience game since I was 20.
Now
We're the
we're
same
talking.
age. And I was so pumped because I've heard of the amygdala, fear, prefrontal cortex, it's planning and action. I could tell you every brain area and I teach neuroanatomy to medical students. But when I started seeing the data on the anterior mid-cingulate cortex, I was like, whoa, this is interesting.
Yep.
And all the data point to the fact that we can build this area up.
Yep.
But that as quickly as we build it up, if we don't continue to invest in things that are hard for us, that we don't want to do, that's the part that feels so Goggin-esque
Yes, sir.
to me, that we don't want to do. Like if you love the ice bath, yeah, I love the ice bath, and you go from 1 minute to 10 minutes, guess what? Your anterior mid-cingulate cortex did not grow.
None.
But if you hate the cold water, if you're afraid of drowning and you get into water and put your head under,
Yep.
then your anterior mid and survive, then the anterior mid-cingulate cortex gets bigger. But if you don't do it the next day, or if you do it the next day and you enjoy it, because hey, I did it yesterday, woohoo, happy me, Merry Christmas, as you would
Right.
say.
Merry Christmas.
Guess what? The anterior mid-cingulate cortex shrinks again.
Yep.
To me, this is one of the most important discoveries that neuroscience has ever made, because it's that I don't want to do something, but do it anyway.
That's right.
That grows this area. And it's almost like I have a friend, he's been sober 30 years from alcohol. And he always says, you know, the amazing thing about addiction is there's a cure. The problem is it only works one day at a time.
Yep.
And so you have to renew it every day.
That's right.
So the anterior mid-cingulate cortex, to me, when I learned about it, two things went off in my head. Whoa, this is super interesting. And two, I got to tell David Goggins about this. And I waited until now
glad.
to tell you because I felt like well, for obvious reasons, I wanted to tell you and I wanted to tell you here.
Well,
I think we're good. Yeah, you know, doing a thing you don't want to do, doing a thing you don't want to do when you normally don't want to do it is, I've said that so many times. It's kind of part of the do more, be more speech that I often will talk about. It's tough to get yourself in position in life to where you feel strong enough. You need to be grounded. You need to have a good, comfortable thing to jump off of. You know, you can't jump very well off of like a lily pad. You know? It's like nothing underneath you, right? So I understand why some people don't want to try certain things because sometimes they're on shaky ground. Like they're not physically or mentally there yet to even consider some of these things. So it is easier for some people to make decisions towards certain things than it might be for others. But I have found it extremely beneficial in learning this information that I've kind of been practicing anyway. But since I've learned this, it's helped me go into the cold plunge. It's helped me do some of the weird shit that I've been doing. Like this morning, I woke up. The second I woke up, walked right outside and walked in my backyard. Went back and forth 5 times because I've been messing around with some grounding and I've been messing around with some cold exposure and stuff like that as well. So I just went out and I just did it. In my head, as soon as I got up, I was like, oh, you should pee first or whatever you should do. I was like, nope, that's the signal to go. That's the sign to go. The second that conflict pops up is the second that thought starts. That's where people think. That's where people, quote unquote, think is where thinking comes from, is that the second that there's a conflicting voice in your head about something else. And I know we had a guest recently that said some people don't have that voice in their head. And that was really interesting.
Johnny Shreve.
I was like, wait a second, that sounds crazy. But I think most people probably do. And there's these things, these signals, let's say you're with some friends and they want to like cliff dive or something crazy. Like, I don't know about you guys, but I'm not cliff diving. Maybe 5 feet, maybe 10 feet, off of diving board. I'll go off a diving board. 10 feet, I could probably figure that out. But like you start getting higher than that, I'm not part of that anymore, because all this other friction would happen in my head. Like, and maybe excuses and stuff, and maybe I should say fuck it and just jump. But maybe it is dangerous. And I think that we have those signals in our brain that tell us not to try that 400-pound squat when our best squat is 365. Like there's these things that happen in your head for a reason. They're there for a reason. And we're not suggesting, and I don't think that any of this information is suggesting that you do anything real wild. How hard the thing is that you're doing, I don't think it has to be that hard. And that's another interesting point, because I've been talking about this for a long time as well. And I experienced this in my powerlifting career. There's times where I probably pushed too hard and I ended up with injury. There's times where I pushed too hard and I wasn't able to make a lift. There's times where I pushed hard and I was overtrained. But for the most part, and I've been saying this for a long time as well, none of it seemed hard because I loved doing all of it. I loved powerlifting. I didn't mind how long it took. Some people would really complain about, man, it's like 3 or 4 hours, especially when you put on powerlifting gear and especially when you get strong. When you start to squat 800, 900, 1,000 pounds, it takes forever to warm up for those sets. And then to get to your top set for the day, and then to still finish out and do your glute ham raises and your reverse hyper and your ab work, and to still put together like an actual workout rather than just squatting like a max set. It took a lot of diligence, but I always liked it. And what I noticed in powerlifting when I was in it, I recognized that I wanted to be out of it so much. And what I mean by that is I recognized that most of the people around me, they were like submerged in it, and they couldn't see past it. They couldn't figure out a way out of it, and they got locked into it, and they got kind of addicted to it. And they didn't have like a growth mindset, where for myself, I was like, I want more. I want not more weight. I want more for myself. I want to eventually be a good dad. I want to eventually be a good partner. I want to be good at all these other things. I want to be good in business. I don't want to just be a power lifter. And I recognize that. And so for me, that meant taking my strength from powerlifting and the confidence that I built there and just start to implement it really slowly over a long period of time into some other things that I'm going to try. I'm going to at least try these other things because I know I don't want to be locked into powerlifting, because I can see what it does to some people. Just like many other sports, doesn't matter what it is. You're into like BMX, riding and stuff. There's going to be a time where you're going to have to retire from that shit. You do it when you're a kid, or you do it in your maybe 30s, and then you're probably over the hill and you're getting banged up and getting hurt. And I saw that with powerlifters. And I was like, man, I don't want to be like these guys. This guy's talking about how he blew his knee out 4 times and he's still trying to squat. It's just like, that's cool that that's what they're into. And I love it when people are obsessed with stuff. I think it's really cool. But for me, I was like, I want something different. I want something new. And so when I started to transition away from powerlifting, it wasn't that hard of a jump off point. Remember, I was saying like the ground that you jump from needs to be stable. I jumped from powerlifting to bodybuilding. It's like, it's not like I'm still in the pool, diving versus swimming. Like diving and swimming are way different things. My wife is a Division I swimmer, and people used to ask her if she dives, and she's like, no. Like they're not the same thing at all. But you get my point here, is like the jump off point from one water sport to another isn't as crazy as going from what I eventually went from, which is powerlifting, into running a marathon.
I know we're not like, obviously, our combined IQ isn't going to be one Andrew Huberman, but we're pretty close. But is hard or difficult a one size fits all? Is hard always hard? What I'm getting at is, hard for you right now is running a marathon. Hard for me right now is running a mile, right? Even though like we can objectively look at that and be like, well, obviously one's really hard and the other one is way less hard. But to me, it almost can equal the same level of difficulty as a marathon for you. So would I still receive some of those same benefits? Because I'm just thinking, if somebody's listening and they're like, well, shoot, if I need to do the hard thing and the marathon's hard, well, now I have to go balls to the wall and train for a freaking marathon.
I do think it's important that things are challenging, because I think it's important that there's a little, like there's a barrier of entry.
Mm-hmm.
I think that can be important. And like, let's say that you found out like that there's certain classes at your jiu-jitsu school that are going to start, like 2 months from now. And it's like, it's just like a more advanced thing, right?
Comp classes, what they're called.
Yeah. They have more availability of these competition classes going on. And you recognize that those are going to be, they're going to be more difficult. They're going to require more of you. And so, and you might be excited by that. And you might say to yourself, you might be like, man, that'd be a really good idea for me to do. I'm going to talk with Nsima and ask a couple other people. And they say, yeah, man, you should definitely do that. And you're excited by it. So I think that the challenge, and the certain guys are going to be in that class that sometimes maybe you're like not always super comfortable rolling with and stuff, but you're like, I'm just going to suck it up. And I'm going to do it once a month. I'm going to show up to that Tuesday class once a month. And that could work great. And having that challenge, I think, can be important. But I think that what they talked about in that podcast, and this would be great when we have Andrew Huberman on the podcast coming up. We're working on scheduling him again to get him on our show. What would be interesting to ask him is, does the task have to be hard? Because he was talking about the task being something that you don't want to do. So that's interesting, because like obviously what you don't want to do could be connected to something being hard. But it doesn't necessarily have to be, because let's say we're trying to convince Nsima to go on a walk and he's like, I hate walking. He would get that same benefit of building that willpower. Nsima likes walking, but if he actually hated it and went on a walk with us, he would get that same benefit of growing that area of the brain. Where I would disagree with Huberman, and what I would disagree with him on, in terms of that statement that he made in that short, condensed part of the podcast, and maybe he has a lot more context around it. What I think is, like he mentioned, if you go in the cold plunge for 1 minute versus doing 10 minutes, I would disagree with that. I do think that life does work, and I do think that things do work in a progressive overload fashion, just like everything else. I mean, it just makes sense that the size of the area of the brain. Now, it might be almost undetectable that area of the brain is growing because, you going from just being a lifter into something like running, maybe that just shows like whatever way they're testing this stuff, maybe that just shows like a profound result. You see that this person, they clearly hated running and now they're running. So that, is a nice amplifier of the size of this area of the brain they're talking about that willpower is generated from. That makes some sense. But I would also say you starting to transition into running and going from being able to run 1 mile in 12 minutes and kind of feel like you're going to die and have a hard time recovering from it. I think that if it's, 6 months from now and now you run that same mile and you run it in 9 minutes and it's easier and you recovered from it well, I still think you're probably going to get some of the benefits of that willpower increasing and having, starting to build what I would kind of consider an iron will. And for super fans out there, for the really maniac super fans, if you remember, I read a passage from a book called Iron Will by Orison Swett Marden. And there was there's also a reading of it by, I got the idea from The Ultimate Warrior. And it's like one of my favorite passages, but it's really incredible. And it talks about the will. And it talks about, I cannot remember the guy's first name, but he's famous for some of his philosophy, I believe. Maybe I'm even slaughtering that. I'm not sure. The guy's last name is Emerson. And he basically says, he goes on to say that the education of the will might be the single most important thing that you could ever be educated on. And if you kind of think about that, it's like, that's really interesting because when you have the will and the courage, I believe that will and courage are tied to each other because courage is doing the thing that you don't want to do as well. Like, it's not always necessarily like maybe by definition, maybe the word scared is in there as well. Like maybe you have to be scared of something to kind of build courage. But I would say that if you're able to get yourself to do the things that you don't want to do when you normally don't want to do them, because if you think about it, a lot of times that's attached to it as well. It's like a timing thing, right? You're like, oh, I was going to do the cold plunge and I was supposed to wake up at 6, but I woke up at 6:15 and there's really not enough time. I'm going to do it later. And you're going to start that diet, but because
it's Valentine's Day.
Yeah, it's Valentine's Day. So you got to wait till Thursday, and then Thursday's not so convenient either, and you're going to just keep you're going to keep pushing it. But if you remember when we had Mike Dolce on the podcast just a few weeks ago, or maybe like 2 weeks ago, and he was talking about how you can really build a lot of resilience through your diet, just resilience in life. And he had this whole story where he went on and on about a Kit Kat. And the short of it is that this Kit Kat followed him all over the world. He was gonna do a training session with Rampage Jackson, and at the time Mike Dolce was a fighter as well, and he knew that they were going to go and do like a really hard workout. So previous to this, he bought a Kit Kat, and he's like, "This is going to be great on like one of these gloomy ass training days that I have, and I'm going to kind of have this as like a de-stressor, as like a little celebration for a good workout." And so he has a workout with Rampage Jackson. They run at like 5 a.m. They're in London. It's foggy and cold, and he's got somebody yelling at him, as he's running. And he said to himself, yeah, after this run, that's going to be the perfect time to eat this Kit Kat. And it just goes on and on. He keeps refusing to eat the Kit Kat. What was the words he was kind of saying? Like, you don't own me or something?
Something like that. Yeah, he would just be like, he would look at the Kit Kat like after, like, okay, I'm going to eat that after I make weight or whatever it is. And he's like, I could eat you, but I'm choosing not to, or something like that.
I could eat you. Yeah, he kept saying. And we were kind of getting
going to.
Yeah, we were kind of getting creeped out by that. We're like, what are you talking about, Mike Dolce?
Eating what?
Yeah, that was.
Yeah.
But anyway, it's a great example. And he's right. You can build a lot of resilience. I mean, think about And so this is an interesting thing about willpower, and I can't wait to ask more questions, because does your willpower get built by not doing stuff? You know what I mean? Like, we're at a party and someone's like, "Hey, Andrew, you want a drink?" You're like, "Nah, man, I'm good." Like, does that help too?
Mm-hmm.
Let's say hypothetically, let's say that you really like to drink, and we're at a party and stuff like that, and we're all hanging out, which we never do. But if we were doing something like that, and you like to have a drink here and there, but you're training and you're preparing for a jiu-jitsu tournament coming up, I say, "Hey, man, you want a drink?" And you're like, "Nah, I shouldn't," you know, and you don't have any. I wonder if that builds your willpower too.
Probably, I would say yes, just because it's the thing that I don't want to do, right?
Right.
It's the more difficult route.
Right.
The easier route would be just to have the drink. But what if it's the flip side? I don't drink at all, and you say, "Hey, here, have a drink," and I go for it. That is more difficult, but I don't think that builds anything. You know, so I don't know. Again, it's kind of a weird.
What
weird
about
question.
this scenario? What about, you know, kind of the old school, the old guy? You hear people talk about this a lot, taking the stairs.
Mm-hmm.
You know, just taking the stairs instead of the elevator. When you're at the airport, they got that little people mover thing. You just walk on the side of it. And
I love that thing because I can walk like 100 miles per hour.
I love walking against it every once in a while too. When there's nobody at the airport, it's kind of great.
Yeah. Well, I mean, according to what Huberman said, that the first couple times that it's difficult, you will grow that willpower thing in your cortex. But then the third, fourth, fifth time, because it becomes a little bit easier, it no longer grows. But I don't know, man. I think making the decision to go against the grain and do something a little bit more difficult than, like, I just think if there's two routes, one's the easier, one's the more difficult, the more you select the difficult, the more willpower you're going to develop.
Yeah, and you could be correct. Like, maybe it's not just doing the thing you don't want to do. Maybe it's also choosing the thing that's a little harder.
Mm-hmm.
You know, hey, would you rather okay, we're going to cold plunge today. You want to go into this tub over here that's 50 degrees? Or you want to go in this one that's 35 degrees?
Shit, yeah.
You know what I mean? And if you just like, without even thinking of it, you're like, boom, you go. And the same thing could be said for jiu-jitsu class, or the same thing could be said for working out with somebody. You know, jiu-jitsu, you're going to roll with you're going to choose Nsima.
Mm-hmm.
Graham Tuttle the other day was telling me that, like, whenever he gets the opportunity, he tries to roll with Nsima. He's like, he's just heavy and he's just like really impossible to deal with. And he's like, when I go compete, he's like, I'm just hoping that everybody else feels lighter than that and that they don't feel quite as strong and they're not as technical as he is.
They absolutely will.
I was like, mathematically, that should work out good, but they are going to be fired up. They're going to be competing and so on.
Yeah, no, same. Anytime that we are in the same room together, we partner up. And I mean, he's not even trying, but I come out with bruises from just doing drills, you know, like it's really tough. I have a kind of a tricky question for you. Because as far as I know, like humans, I think I'll use the word, are wired to kind of seek out more comfort, or they're trying to seek out survival, right? That's potentially partially why in this country we have like an overweight problem, because at one point we had to like really like, okay, this is all the food we have. We need to eat all of it because we may never get another meal again. We've gotten way past that, but some of those things that are wired in us haven't changed. So with that, in choosing the difficult thing, if that seems to be doing something for our willpower, and Andrew Huberman said even the willpower to live, like that's heavy stuff. If that's there, then how come this other side is also there? Like, it seems like we have both systems are firing off at the same time. And then for some reason, whoever put us together decided it would be a good idea to let us choose which route to go in. So do you think that we are technically wired to go for the easy stuff while still having the hardware to get rewarded when we decide the more difficult stuff?
Yeah, I think when it comes down to like how you live your everyday life, and when it comes to like, I don't know, the bigger things in life, like willpower the will to figure out a way to be organized, the will to be ahead, the will to, like, there's a lot of different versions of it, you know? And I think that I think you can get exhausted with it. And I think you can kind of overdo it I think that's what Goggins in that podcast, which you guys should listen to, the most recent podcast of Huberman and David Goggins, really phenomenal. But I think what he's describing is he refused to have somebody follow him around with a camera and do a documentary. He was like, I don't want like ordinary people like judging my life and them thinking that I'm psychotic because of the way that the way that I'm choosing to live my life. Now, it can get ridiculous, right? Like choosing the harder thing. Like, so David Goggins gets done with a 12-mile run for the day. He lifted and he comes home. And does he eat plain chicken with no salt on it? Like, you know what I mean? Like, is everything that way? No, he probably eats what he kind of enjoys. So we're going to have different parts in our life where we're going to choose the easier thing. We're going to have other times where we choose the comfort. But in our survival, I think it's really important that we have, built into us, we have this need to want to conserve energy. And some of the stuff that I'm learning and some of the stuff I'm realizing is that everything comes down to energy and everything comes down to power and everything comes down to strength. And we're talking about willpower. And willpower can't come from nowhere. Like, you're still going to need calories for willpower. Like, you're going to need your body to be functioning as well as it can to be one of these to be one of these people that work in this way. And they mentioned in the beginning of what Huberman said, he said, this area of the brain will be smaller for obese people. And that's interesting. I'd love to learn more about that. And I'd love to dig into that more. And what other category of people do we see this area of the brain being a little bit smaller? And it makes sense because not just somebody that's obese, I also just wonder about people that are like sick in other ways. Maybe you have to really shrink down. You think about when your back hurt. What were your decisions like in your day-to-day when your back hurt? It's just what were they like? They were different, right?
Everything was determined based off of how bad my back hurt. Like we'll start with the most simple, basic things that you need to do in life. Am I going to brush my teeth like in an awkward way, bent over with my elbow on the counter? Or am I going to be able to brush my teeth like everybody else, upright, and really like get a good brush?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm not saying I had like bad teeth or bad breath or anything, but there's some days where it's like, I'm going to have to go back and do that again because I couldn't get like some of the weird angles or whatever it may be. So small things like that.
That's brutal. And to have that weigh on you the whole day, every day.
Every day.
How you put your shoes on, how you pick up your clothes, your laundry, how you get something out of the dryer, how you do your dishes. Like your dishes, I think, kind of hurt everyone's back.
Yeah, they do. And then also get this, dude, like admitting defeat and saying, wife, can you help me put on my socks? Like, I've never felt more defeated in my life than in that moment. And so stuff like that, is very... Or
telling people you can't. When someone's like, hey, you want to... You're like, I can't. My back is weird, right? And so I think that's why it's important. And I think in the podcast that I did with Bradley Martin, I think they'll be comforted by the fact that we did talk a lot about people having different perspectives. And I heard this said by our buddy, Russell Buddy, recently on his podcast when he was having a conversation with one of the former super training members. And he was talking in his podcast about, and it's a perspective that how do you know anything about it unless you're next to somebody or unless you are that person. But he said, this guy has had a 500-pound perspective on everything he's doing in his life because that's what he weighs. And that is like, man, that just changes. It changes everything. And I think it's important that we can talk tough and we can talk about building willpower and we can talk about how you need to get after it. And you do. you do need to figure out a way to bring like more intensity into your life. You do have to figure out a way to do new and novel things. You have to figure out ways of challenging yourself. But for you to like, I'm talking to people about like trying to get outside. Well, there's certain parts of the country that are covered in like tons of snow. Could you go outside when there's a lot of snow? Sure. But it's way harder. It sucks. Like it's not. And maybe, when they clear some of the snow, maybe you can finally get outside. But like even just in Lake Tahoe, I've been snowed in before where there's enough snow where I open the front door and snow comes in the house.
Whoa.
Like we literally got snowed in there before. And we're there for a handful of days and couldn't, like, could we have gotten out? I'm sure that we could have. I shoveled the driveway, but it like didn't really, we're talking like the snow is so deep where you have to shovel one spot like 4 times because you can only get so much snow each time. Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter how strong you are. Like there's just too much. So there's people have situations like that, like not just it's snowing outside, not just weather, not just traffic, not just all these other things that we all have to deal with. They also have their own internal things going on. People just don't have good confidence. So for them to try the newer novel thing, they had a bad experience with it. No, they're not going to the gym. Mm-hmm. They don't want to ever go to a gym. They don't want to ever, they went to the gym and they got super sore. Then they went to go another time and somebody said something to them and they got super depressed and they're not ever like it's not an option. And so for that person, for them to embark on exercise is now looking way different than what you and I might think. Mm-hmm. You might think, oh, just go get a gym membership. And they're thinking like, man, I can't, I don't think I can do that. Kind of like with you with your back, right? It's like, well, I'd love to do these deadlifts, but I'm not in a good position to really mess around with that at the moment. So I think it's important that we have good perspective, but then also, how does the person that maybe is in a more compromised position, how do they get started? How do they start to build their willpower? And it could start on something as simple as a walk. It could start as simple as something like, I know I've been talking a ton about like cold exposure and the sun, but these are all things, look, the sun, we know that the sun can help make you feel better. So just give it a try. We know that being inside all the time and being on our computers or playing video games and stuff, it could be fun. It's a form of entertainment. But we also know that going outside has a ton of benefits. So I think that's how you get your momentum going. Years ago, if someone was to ask me about diet, years ago, if somebody was to ask me about, or I should say, years ago, if somebody was to ask me about weight loss and where to start, I would have first started with food. Then over the years, I switched gears and I was like, I actually should probably start with movement because most of the people that I know, they really struggle with their food. But it's not that bad for them to introduce at least a little bit of movement. But now I keep shifting because I keep learning new things. Now, I don't even need you to move. I just need you to get outside. If you can get yourself outside, there's things like seasonal depression. Right? Why is there? Because it's fucking dark and it's cold out. And our circadian rhythm gets thrown off quite a bit. And we need these lights. We need to go outside. We need to get some sun, at least here and there. And that's a great way to build momentum. I'm not saying that you're going to get the sun and it's going to fix everything for you and you're going to lose 20 pounds just because you got outside. But it's to start. Mm-hmm. And if getting some exposure outside gives you the confidence the next day to go on a 5-minute walk, then maybe days down the road, maybe you start walking a little bit more and maybe you're going to start to accumulate over time. And I think that's what you're trying to do with willpower. So it's not like you're trying to have this crazy willpower in every single thing that you do, because I think after a while, your energy is just going to your energy is going to run out. Like some of the most disciplined people that I know, like when I'm thinking of some of the people that I know, and I've hung out with them kind of behind the scenes, they're normal. They're very normal. Like I know for sure, like if we were to sit down and eat with David Goggins, he would just be eating like whatever. You know what I mean? He wouldn't be like, it's got to be grass fed, it's got to be grass finished. I don't ever have a diet soda. Like he wouldn't be crazy with that part.
It would be funny to just, hey, Mark, pass the salt. And you're like, David Goggins asked for the salt? What?
Yeah, exactly.
He needs salt? This is weird.
Yeah, how come he's not going to yell at us about the salt? That's because there's, as different as we all may be, we're also very similar in a lot of ways.
All right, Project family, it's time to step up your barefoot shoe game. Now, we talk about foot health all the time on the podcast, but the winter months are coming, and Vivo's come out with some slick boots. These are their Gobi boots, and they have different colors on their website. Now, these have a wide toe box, they are flat, and they are flexible, and they are stylish and sexy as boots. But obviously, Vivo is awesome because they not only have boots and casual shoes like their Novus right here, which again, wide, flat, flexible, so that your foot can do what it needs to do within the shoe, and you're getting the benefit of having your feet improve while you're walking around in shoes. But they also have shoes for the gym, like their Modus, again, flat, flexible, wide toe box, along with their Primus Light 3s and all the classics that you know. They also have shoes for running and trail running on their website. So again, for all barefoot type shoes, Vivo is your one-stop shop for pretty much all the types of kicks you need. Andrew, how can they get it?
Yes, you guys got to head over to vivobarefoot.com/powerproject. There you guys will see a code at the top. Make sure you guys enter that code and you'll save 15% off your order. Again, vivobarefoot.com/powerproject. Links in the description as well as the podcast show notes. We talked about it a second ago as in maybe like half an hour ago. But can you explain what happens when somebody does kind of start to venture out and they just out of nowhere, for whatever reason, start getting some assistance with whatever it is that they're doing? Maybe somebody that they work with all of a sudden is like, oh, you're getting into running. I've been doing that for the last 15 years. I would love to show you what, maybe some tips or whatever, right? Because everybody loves their thing. And then you all of a sudden run into somebody and now you're trying their thing and they're hyped up to show you. But it's so weird that you could have been working next to this person for like 30 years or whatever. And then all of a sudden you take you step out of your comfort zone, get into running, and then you just discover that he's like the best running coach in the area.
Right.
But if you never ventured out, like that wouldn't happen. We've seen this happen so many times. I've experienced this a million times at this point now. Maybe not a million, that's a little bit drastic. But a lot of times, what causes that? Can you explain that at all? Like, can anybody explain it?
Like, kind of almost like what causes like your eyes to kind of open up to like how much opportunity's been like at your doorstep forever.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's just, I think you're shut down, for that part, for that. I think running is a great example because I think a lot of people like hate running and they'll use the word hate and they'll say, they'll say never. They'll be very definitive about their situation with running. And I actually think it's an important feature to be able to run. I just think that like we're designed to move. And I'm not talking about like running really far, but I think we're designed for at least some running. But I think what happens is we say that we hate something. And then like anything that sounds remotely close to that, you're just sort of shut off to it. And we start to develop these blind spots. I was thinking about this just a couple days ago when I was listening to a podcast, and I was like, oh, that's really interesting. I wonder my friend never mentioned that to me. And then I started thinking about it more, and I'm like, well, I think he doesn't like that guy. I think that's probably what it is. It's probably why he. And so, they kind of talk about throwing the baby out with the bathwater type thing. I think that sometimes you take a whole entire concept and you just ditch it. And so then you're honed in and focused on the things that you believe in, but your beliefs have to be shifted like kind of internally, I think. And they got to be shifted by yourself, even though there could be influence of other people. It takes a lot of other people mentioning something many, many times for you to start to kind of believe that might be a good idea or a good option for you. And then once that kind of happens, once you realized it yourself, even though it did come from Instagram and it came from 7 other people mentioning it to you over the years, once you now have this idea of what it is that you want to do, now I think then you start to kind of really open your eyes to how many other people are into this and how valuable it could be. You know, everyone's heard people talk about jujitsu. I have not experienced jujitsu enough to know, but I've experienced a lot of other sports enough to know that it's just downright emotional. Like, you get this emotional attachment to it. And you could probably, you probably had emotional reactions to some jujitsu that you've been doing, or even just to like another jujitsu athlete talking on Instagram about how hard it was their first couple times. And you're like, fuck, man, I've been there too. And you get weepy over it and stuff like that too. Meanwhile, it's something you weren't even doing 2 years ago. You know what I mean? And you're like, man, I wish Rogan would shut the fuck up about jujitsu. I wish Kyle Kingsbury would shut up about jujitsu. I wish this guy would shut up. But eventually, the idea starts to kind of be like, you're like, oh, you know, I should probably, my back, you know. And then maybe a couple people said, hey, you know what? You know, your back already hurts. Or maybe you just said it in your own brain. You're like, your back already sucks. Can't get any worse, I don't think. So fuck it. Let's go for it.
Yeah. Well, to be as nice as possible to the previous, years of who I was, I didn't have a reason to fix my back. My back wasn't against the wall. My bad back wasn't against the wall. There was still plenty of space for me to keep falling backwards. But basically, so my son was born. I didn't want to be somebody that couldn't roll on the ground with him. And then on top of that, I wanted him to do jujitsu, right? And I didn't want to be one of those parents that just forces their kids to do stuff that they're not doing themselves. So I'm like, all right, I have to step up and I have to go do it. So I forced my back to get better, basically. It's like if you're broke but you live at home with your parents, well, how come he can't get a job, or how come his business isn't taking off? But then his buddy that was forced to move out, or maybe didn't have wealthy parents or whatever, and something happened, and then his business takes off, or he gets a good job. It's like, well, what's the difference? They hung out together, they went to the same school. Well, one had no chance, or no choice, I should say, to take off, right? The other one still has an opportunity to kind of still like kick it. I had the ability to hang out and have a bad back because it didn't take away from my money. It made me unhappy, but I was still able to like come here, podcast, be in pain, go home, be in pain, and be okay. Once my son was born, well, that changed everything. That forced me to get better. And then on top of that, I fell in love with jujitsu, and I can't have a bad back while training jujitsu. And then oddly enough, obstacle is the way. Jiu-jitsu is the thing that helped really, really solidify and get rid of my back pain, because I was moving in all these weird angles and like literally being folded up, like, heels over my head, folded up. And this thing that I thought would actually like break me was the thing that actually built me and made me stronger. It's wild. Yeah.
I always loved the get rich or die trying from 50 Cent. I always loved that. Always loved that quote. Like, it's just, I think it's pretty amazing. But for me, like, it was like have an invention or die kind of thing. Like, I had nothing going on.
Exactly.
I had nothing. And it wasn't like, I wasn't like super compromised. I wasn't going to like end up out in the streets or anything like that. But I was not going to be able to do anything more than just some lifting. And people might view some of that lifting as being extraordinary, but it was something that I loved. And it was something that I didn't mind putting the time in. And so over like a long period of time, yes, I became like proficient at it. But I cared about it. I enjoyed it. I liked it a lot. But again, it was something that I did from the time I was a kid. And I tried to do other stuff many times. I just wasn't good enough at those other things to be able to break loose from powerlifting. It was like, powerlifting was just kind of always there. I started young, and it was kind of like a girlfriend that just wouldn't go away, and I always knew I'd end up with her. And it happened to be powerlifting.
This is really mean of me to say, but like, imagine if you were smart. We might not have the slingshot. We wouldn't have this podcast right now.
Exactly, because I would have pursued other stuff.
You would have other options, and your back wouldn't have been against the wall.
Yeah, 100%. And you need that feeling. I mean, my wife and I, the first home that we lived in Woodland, was purchased with my wife's name on it and my brother-in-law, Richard. They bought the home together because I didn't have anything going on. And he lived with us for a little while. And so I needed something, I needed something to like happen. And you're 100% right. Like my mind wouldn't have been in those places. My mind wouldn't have been thinking about an invention. It wouldn't have been thinking about, it wouldn't have been thinking about like, it just wouldn't have been thinking along the same lines, I know that you probably shouldn't like load up and just go for like one big giant punch, but that's what I felt like I needed to do. And the slingshot was that. That's exactly what it was. It was me just like revving my fist back as far as I could. Like, hey, this is going to be telegraphed, but it's all I got. You know what I mean? Like, I'm going to throw it with everything that I have, and I had to make it work. And again, I'm not trying to make it sound like, I would have been homeless or anything like that and things of that nature. But, that was around the time the economy crashed. We did have to move out of our house. Like we did have to like downsize. We did have to make, some other decisions that were just like uncomfortable. And it was all just because I couldn't figure out a way to like generate any income. And so sometimes you do have to be in those uncomfortable places. But who am I to be an inventor? Who am I to be a patent holder, right? And so again, like I built up some of that confidence through powerlifting and through, getting myself stronger there, built up enough willpower, built up enough confidence to now I'm like, well, if someone's going to invent something in powerlifting, why wouldn't it be me? I'm fucking awesome. And at that time too, I mean, I think it's why some people gravitated towards some of the content that I had, because I would fuck around like that a lot. I wouldn't necessarily say I was the best, because I respect powerlifting way too much to make any sort of claim like that, but I would talk shit. And I had so much fun doing it. But a lot of that it's not like that came from nowhere. It's not like I was totally making it up and having this like false confidence. I was actually very confident in myself and felt really good about what I was doing, what I was accomplishing. And that made it so much easier when it came to having an invention and turning that invention into an idea that you sell, and then having that idea turn into a business, which, is all just, it all just made sense. Like it wasn't, so it's interesting when you think about like doing things that are hard. There's not really a part of that process that was hard necessarily, although there was like a lot of hardship and a long time of me, struggling in school and of me powerlifting and of me doing like a bunch of shit that like no one seemed to understand. So there was like all those years of all that stuff. But then when it came to actually acting on some of that and actually having a product to sell and actually having an invention, those things, they really just took like time.
Mm-hmm.
It took time, and there wasn't like even getting a patent, it took a couple years, but again, it's not like it was hard. It was just like communication back and forth. And then finally, we got it. And there were some situations that did become difficult, like, keeping inventory and, having employees. And then there's like all kinds of things like that later on that had some like difficulty to it. But, for those people that are scared to like go all in on something, again, I don't think the thing, I'm not saying that the thing is never going to be hard, but it doesn't have to be hard. And I think that that's where people's brain is at. It's like they think that something needs to be really hard. I mean, just think about this as an example. Like, does the guy that makes, $60K a year versus the guy that makes 120 a year, like, is the guy that makes 120 a year working harder? You start to get into that kind of math, and you start to kind of think, I would imagine as those numbers go up, you start to get into the 200s and 300,000 and so on, that the guy's probably working like things are probably getting a little smoother, you know?
He's working smarter for sure.
Yeah, and that's not always the case, but you guys know what I mean. Like we do have like a lot of blue collar workers, and to us, maybe to those guys, maybe some of those guys enjoy that. For me, that would be really difficult. That would be really challenging to wake up every day and to kind of have a construction job. I wouldn't even think that it sucked necessarily. I'm just not good at some of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I would think it. I have done some laborious jobs, and obviously I was like smaller and weaker.
To do it for a long time is hard.
No. There's a reason why it's called back-breaking work, because it breaks the back.
To do it for a couple of weeks or something, a summer job, like I did that when I was young, it's like, that's kind of great.
Mm-hmm.
But to do that all the time, do it when it's cold out and everything else.
Yeah, dude, I've had like low skill laborious jobs. So what I mean is like just working in a warehouse where it's like, all right, I need you guys to move all these boxes full of full like filled up paint cans. So like boxes of like 4 paints, 4 big old buckets or gallons, I should say. Not the heaviest thing, but it's an awkward box and some of them are torn. So you have to like fucking hold it all weird. I just need you guys to move it from this corner to that corner over there.
Oh,
all day long. All right, cool. Here we go. The next day. All right. Turns out that that's the wrong corner. So I need you to put it in this back corner over here. And I need that done by lunchtime, because after that, you're going to have to, do the same thing all over again. And all we did was, I just call this professional Tetris players. That's all we did. We just played Tetris all day long. It was the most annoying thing ever. Talk about
you're probably part of some experiment.
Potentially. In my head, I'm like, I don't think anybody actually gets anything done here. All we do is move boxes every single day. Like nobody's actually selling. Like what? I would look at stuff like that and be like, this is dumb. I was like, but I'm collecting a paycheck, and all I have to do is like take my brain out, put it to the side, then walk in and go. But anyway, back to our conversation. It's something that I'm hearing a lot on social media over probably the past like year or so. And again, when you start hearing something on social media or YouTube, wherever it may be, like people dissing cold plunges all of a sudden, it's like, where's this coming from? But I'm hearing people talk a lot about seasons. They're like, oh, I'm just going through this season right now. And so my question is like, well, first off, do you believe in like that whole like idea of seasons? Like, oh, right now I'm going through a season where I'm just focused on building my company or, whatever, creating more assets for my future. And then through another season where you're like, okay, I'm going to kind of chill on that and I'm going to work on getting the best physique of my life or whatever it may be. Do you think that like there is such thing as like, all right, this calendar like month, we're focusing on this thing. I'm in this season right now.
I think that by saying that you're going through a season, it sounds like uncontrollable. It sounds like you're saying that the situation or the stage that you're at, you can only do this thing. And because you're doing this thing, that everything's like too hectic and you can't get to anything else. It's probably my most hated thing is to see, texts come back from people where they talk about their things are hectic, things are chaotic.
Swamped.
Yeah, I'm swamped. I'm always like, why are you? I mean, you guys would be shocked that the fitness influencers, like you're a fucking fitness influencer and you're swamped. How is that possible? I have nothing to do. Every day, my calendar is wide open all the time.
Fucking sucks, dude.
And I got 2 kids and multiple jobs, and I'm running and lifting and whatever else. But I can still make time for stuff very easily. I'm not overwhelmed, And that's what I see is when somebody texts that back to me. I'm like, oh, they're overwhelmed. Like instead of it saying I'm swamped, I'm like, I'm overwhelmed and I'm a pussy. It's like, get your shit together over there, God damn it. I do think that you can build up multiple things at the same time. I'm very fortunate in the fact that, and I do have perspective that everyone's life is a little different, but I do have, I am blessed to have an amazing wife that is in all this with me to get, we're in it together. And so, if I was Christian Guzman, who like when he came here, he shared a lot of really cool stuff with us about his business and stuff. And he does a lot of the like day-to-day on top of like, and I don't know if it's the same now, his companies have grown so much, but at the time, he was like even had a hand in like designing stuff, the shirts, the logos, the clothing, the
samples, all of them.
Yeah. The
crazy.
Yeah, sampling like the material and like checking this and this stretches this way and that way. And he was very, very involved. And I think he was very involved in like the numbers and all that stuff too. Todd Abrams is another guy who was like that as well.
Chris Williamson.
Todd Abrams is somebody that I really admire a lot. He has a shit ton of kids. I think he's got like 3 or 4 kids. And he's done a good job, because while he was building Icon Meals, he was also building himself.
Yeah.
And it's funny because you'll mention certain people to him and he'll be like, oh yeah, I consulted with that guy, or I consulted. The guy loves to study, he loves to study business. And almost any business person you can kind of think of in your head, he has actually went out and purchased consulting from a lot of these people, which I think is amazing. Like that's really admirable, because a lot of times we're like, I got it. I'm good.
I'm above him, or I'm better than him.
Yeah. What am I going to learn from this guy? No, he was like, no, I need to learn as much as I possibly can about this. But there's a guy who figured it out. There's a guy who was able to spin multiple plates at the same time. And I think I think that people think that everything has to be really difficult or really hard for you to get results, you're lifting and whatever. And I'm here to tell you, it just doesn't need to be. It doesn't need to be hard. Like to have a physique, to have a good body, to look like you lift, to build some good strength. It doesn't need to be hard. Now, occasionally you might bump up to some situations where you run into an injury, or there might be situations where things get a little bit more difficult. But what I mean by this is like, you're like, what are you talking about, man? It's really hard. You train X amount of time, and you got X amount of hours and X amount of sets and X amount of reps. Like it's a lot. It is a lot, but just because it's a lot doesn't mean it's hard. Anything that you can break up into smaller pieces isn't hard to do. I think that's a quote from, I always want to say Harrison Ford, from Henry Ford, who created the...
I love all his movies.
Yeah.
Indiana Jones is my favorite.
Yeah. Yeah, the guy that did Indiana Jones said that anything you break down into smaller parts is going to be more manageable. Henry Ford, he created the assembly line. And that's a good way to look at lifting, fitness, running, jiu-jitsu. I kind of like this idea. I don't know why I picked the number 6, but I just did. I'm like, what about, 6 days, 6 weeks, 6 months, 6 years? Like what's something going to look like when you think about like 6 days from now? If I follow this plan, 6 days from now, how am I going to feel? 6 weeks, how am I going to feel? 6 months, how am I going to feel? 6 years, how am I going to, you know what I mean? If you start to think about stuff like that, or you can even do it like whatever number you want, 3 or 5 or whatever. And you can kind of say to yourself, yeah, what is this going to look like? If I'm somewhat consistent with this over the next 5 years, what's that going to turn into? What's that going to look like? Let's say you're doing jujitsu like Smokey's doing. Like Smokey goes once a week. He tried to step it up recently, go twice a week. He's like, nope. He's like, that's pretty hard and just doesn't fit, because Smokey still likes to get after it with the weights that he's lifting. So he found something that worked. And I think Nsima a long time ago sent us a video of a guy that received his black belt in jiu-jitsu after like 12 years of going once a week or something like that. So anything's possible. And obviously, like, again, there's going to be some challenges in there, right? But my point about stuff not being nearly as hard as you think it's going to be is that every time something gets to be a little bit more difficult, your body adjusts to it a little bit more. Every time you think that 185-pound bench is going to feel heavy, your body slightly got prepared from you benching 175. So it gets to be easier over time. Like benching 315, I think you were mentioning this earlier, like for one person, something that's difficult or something that they don't like to do may be different from another person. And when it comes to something like strength, strength is acquired, over time. And it can be relative. For one person, 315 could feel really easy. And could be like, I could do that for 20 reps. Mm-hmm. And for somebody else, like, man, that's a life. I hope that one day, I can put 3 wheels on there. That would be amazing. And we are all different. And we do need to have different perspectives on it. But the way that the person that gets to 315 and the way that the person gets to 225 is the same. They're very similar. They need a certain stress on the body in order for the body to recognize what you're trying to do, in order for your body to adopt and adapt to what it is that you're doing. And our bodies are very adaptive. They can adapt to just about anything. So if you give your body these clean inputs to get stronger, it will get stronger. I've said this a million times. There's not a person on this earth that can't get stronger. Everyone can get stronger. Everyone can get better. Everyone can get faster. Everyone could be more proficient. Everyone can learn better. Everyone can read faster. Everybody could write better. Everyone possesses the ability to just get a little bit better at stuff. But there's no requirement for that being really difficult that I've ever really seen or ever really. If there is anything difficult about any of it is to try to be consistent. So there's not necessarily, when it comes to, let's say you're 35 years old and you're kind of out of shape. If you don't put a time cap on it, it's not going to be that hard for you to get in shape. If you're 35 and you're 280 pounds and you're trying to be in shape by the summertime and we're just in February, it's really impossible. Mm-hmm. And even if you're trying to be in shape for the summer the next year and to look amazing, that's still going to be cutting it close. How many years did it take you to get to that 280 pounds? It's going to take at least half of that to unwind some of this shit. So if it took you 10, 12 years, that's when you started to really accumulate body fat. And now it's probably going to take 5 or 6 years for you where people go, oh my God, I cannot believe you totally, did a 180. For you to make some progress and for you to lose 20 pounds and stuff, that can happen. That can happen pretty quickly. But again, even in this example, if you're trying to just dive down your weight or you're trying this extraordinary goal with a time cap on it, that can be hard. That can be difficult. And those are usually things that you can't sustain. And so you maybe do it, you maybe reach your goal, but then all hell breaks loose afterwards. And those kinds of things I don't want to say they're never great, but they're not good life concepts. I think just saying I'm just gonna play the long game. I'm just gonna get good at this. I'm gonna absorb it the best that I can, and I'm really gonna take my time with it. It's such a difficult thing to do. But even with our boy right here, John Cena, sitting in front of me over here on every podcast, we got his little wrestling doll over here. John is somebody that my brothers and I got into professional wrestling many, many years ago. But watching that guy play this kind of slow and steady game of I don't think people know or knew. I think he was in Ohio Valley Wrestling for 5 years, which doesn't sound that long. But normally they don't keep talented people as talented as John is down on that level for that long. But he didn't mind it. I think he loved it. I think he loved submerging himself in that. He's I'm going to learn everything that I need so that when I do come up, I'm going to be able to handle it. So not only did he come up and not only did he start to go through the ranks, but he was able to be sustainable. He was able to sustain it for a long time. And other guys that they brought up quicker, they couldn't handle it. And so I think it's just a good life lesson is to, if you take your time with a lot of this stuff, I know we're talking about building willpower and we're always talking about, how to be success and how to sort of make something of yourself. You don't really have to make something of yourself. You already are something. It's already within you. I talk about this a lot. It's already within you. Most of the components and stuff are there. You just have to work at it and chip at it every single day. And when you do that and you make things incrementally a little bit more challenging over time, you'll get better and better and better. And you can kind of say to yourself in your head, I've always called these bullets. People give you like fuel. They give you like bullets for your gun when they say something negative to you. And you can remember that. I'm going to fucking write that down, you know? I'm going to write that down and we'll see, 3 years from now, 4 years from now. You might be right now. That shitty comment that you just made to me that fucking stung, that hurt. You might be right now, but I'm going to make you wrong 5 years from now.
Improving your sleep quality is as easy as shutting your mouth. And what I mean by that is putting some tape on, breathing through your nose will increase your sleep quality. It's no longer just something that only the bros do. It's now been researched and people understand that if you can breathe through your nose while you're asleep, you'll have better sleep quality and you will wake up more rested. Hostage tape is also really awesome because I know what I used to do. I used to use a little bit of a cheaper tape, and every time I'd wake up in the morning, the tape would be somewhere else on the bed or on my face, but it wouldn't be on my mouth anymore. But hostage tape, if you have a beard or if you don't, will stay comfortably on your mouth all through the night. And if you're someone who has a problem breathing through your nose, Hostage also has nose strips, so you can place those on your nose while you're asleep, or if you want to be like one of those Hormozy guys, you can wear it during the day. Andrew, how can they get it?
Yes, that's over at hostagetape.com/power project, where you guys will receive an entire year's supply of mouth tape and the nose strips for less than $1 a night. Again, that's over at hostagetape.com/power project. Links in the description as well as the podcast show notes. I'm going to ask a dumb question, because if somebody's fired up and they're talking about, maybe they even mentioned this podcast episode to somebody else, and if you do, thank you. But in regards to like, okay, I'm going to go build up willpower now. Again, this is a dumb question. Why does somebody want to build willpower?
I think it's going to be that thing that's going to be just always sitting there, and it's going to be super reliable. When you build up your willpower, it's going to be something that's going to be reliable. Like, I think that when I go on vacations, when I go, like I'm going to Iceland this week, my family knows that like I'm still going to eat the best that I can eat. I'm still going to go on my walk. Like, it's still going to happen. It's going to be cold there. I'm going to freeze my ass off. But because I've built these disciplines, these habits, because I've worked on my willpower, I still have that to rely on. And one of the things that comes from willpower is accomplishment. When you have the will to do these things, you can check it off your list. Something that I found really interesting by using the app Morpheus, that's the heart rate monitor thing that I wear that checks your HRV. It asks you it asks you to rate, it asks you like to rate your workout. And it's super interesting because you get to select what style of workout you're doing. So let's say that I select a workout that is like a slow and steady run, and my heart rate is supposed to be like 120 beats or something like that. And I'm supposed to do that for 45 minutes. Well, when I do that for 45 minutes, I get to check it off, and I get to, when I'm done, I get to say I got a 10 out of 10 on that. I don't think we do that for ourselves enough in life and in our day-to-day, and we need to do it more. So you set out for the day, I'm going to get into the cold plunge. Maybe you need to be a little bit more specific, and maybe you need to say, I'm going to get in the cold plunge for 90 seconds, okay? You go in the cold plunge, 90 seconds. How'd you do in the cold plunge? 10 out of 10. Fucking 100%. I fucking rocked it. How'd you do with, getting some sunlight today? I went on a 10-minute walk. I already got at least one of those in. I'm hoping to maybe get another one later on today. And you start to build up these victories. You start to build up these wins. I realize, I'm always kind of selecting all the same shit because I'm like, I'm lifting, I'm walking, I'm running. But I'm not creative enough to come up with a lot of other new or novel things. But even with all that, I have been doing and I have been practicing new things. I have been jumping. I have been, when I'm running, I just start to run differently. I'll run backwards. I'll sprint. I'll sometimes stop and do like push-ups and do like a lot of different a lot of different activities and a lot of different things. And I think that when you have a good, strong willpower, you'll always be able to rely on it at any time, no matter what happens to you in the rest of your life. So you build up these wins and you build up these victories and you feel good about yourself, but something horrible happens. A family member dies, and it's like, oh man, like, what do I do tomorrow, man? Fuck. I'm going to check in on the family, and if everyone's okay, I'm going to go to jujitsu. You know what I mean? Like, it's there, like it's still there, because one of the most important things is for you to make sure that you're still yourself. And I mean, whenever any tragedy comes around and anything crazy happens in our lives, who would tell you any different that it's a bad idea to be around friends? Like I've had some friends have some really crazy things happen to them, and they've been some friends that aren't always super stable. So I'm like, is there anybody else around? You got a friend, can you go to someone's house? Can you spend a night with somebody? Because I'm worried they might harm themselves, or they might drink, or might relapse, or have a situation like that. And so when you have willpower, you're going to have, even if your life doesn't feel stable, you're going to be stable on the inside, and you're going to be strong on the inside, and you're going to be able to rely on these things. And these things, they'll always make you feel good. They'll always make you feel good. They'll make you feel good about yourself. And that's another thing that we don't really talk about often enough. I mean, this should be great practice. I never actually even really did this. I should do it myself, but just write down like 10 things that make you feel really good, and then try to do them. Like,
what a concept.
I mean, it doesn't, and you obviously you want to watch out for certain things. Like, you don't want to, a bunch of drugs on your list, or a bunch of
so many rules already. I don't like this.
A bunch of pizza and everything else like that. But you kind of want, things that are maybe
good for you.
Yeah, things that are good for you, things that are a little healthy. I always say, like, taking a shower makes me feel good. So there's been times where, I've had some conversations with my wife. Maybe we were talking about like business, or maybe stuff's going a little sideways, like an uncomfortable conversation. And it's like, you pause from that for a little bit. I'm like, I'm going to go take a shower. I take a shower. Now my mind's a little bit more clear. We talk things out a little bit more, and everything's cool. So you find those things. I mean, taking a shower is not really like a willpower thing necessarily, but for me, it's something that I associate with me feeling better, me coming out of that feeling better. And a lot of the things that you are going to probably start to associate with your willpower are going to be things that will probably make you feel better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the day my mom died, I worked. I didn't go to jiu-jitsu the very next day, but the very next opportunity after that, I was at jiu-jitsu. And I just simply said, because like one of my buddies was like, not surprised to see me, but like he came up and he, gave his condolences. And I forgot what was said, but something kind of like, oh, it's cool that you're here. And I'm like, dude, movement is medicine.
Mm-hmm.
Like it fixes everything. But also like, yeah, just having the willpower and having the good habits to continue to do things. Same thing, her funeral, I worked that morning knowing that I was going to have to speak in front of the entire family, at church and stuff. But it's like, no, we got stuff we need to do. And I don't know if in that moment I was thinking like, oh, I need to lean into the hard thing or whatever it is. But it was just like no, business as usual. Obviously today's like a, monumental day, if that's the right word, but a memorable day, I'll say instead. But yeah, no, we got to keep pushing no matter what happens. And I think because I have leaned into some of the more difficult things, it put me ahead of, not saying I'm better than the rest of my family, but like as they are, going through the mourning process, it's like they might have had a little bit more difficult time with the whole situation because maybe they weren't leaned into the hard stuff. Maybe they did lean into the conservation side of things, right, with the energy and whatnot. And so, yeah, for me personally, yeah, just being able to have some of that willpower just helped me in one of the strangest times of my life. Like nobody preps you for that unless you are the author of Tea Time with the Reaper. I forgot his name.
Yeah.
Really interesting episode that we had a long time ago. But yeah, nobody talks to you about that sort of thing. And then when you're faced with a weird situation like that, if you don't have that willpower and if you don't have the experience of doing like the harder, more difficult thing, then you're going to be kind of thrown off by almost anything, let alone something more difficult.
Yeah, willpower is definitely like a skill, and it takes time to be able to build it. And I think, we choose a lot of physical stuff. That's what we talk about here on the Power Project all the time. And I think the physical stuff, I think it's a physical stress, I've had situations where I've had to go up and talk in front of people before, and my body shakes, my voice shakes, like, especially when I was new to that, and I just wasn't used to that. Very nervous and very scared, and just kind of hated it. Over time, I learned to lean into it. I remember in school, having to do a few times and getting up in front of the class and talking, and just being like really embarrassed, and just had a really, really tough time. And the next time that I did it, or a couple times after that, maybe, I was like, you know what? Like, you're kind of good at making people laugh. So let's see if like you can do a little bit of that, and like then maybe it makes it easier, And then it started becoming more fun for me. And it kind of broke me in. And then when I did professional wrestling and stuff, they just make you do a lot of that. Yeah. And so when we're talking about doing these things that you don't want to do, even as I got more skilled with that, even as I got better with that, I still didn't really want to do it a lot of times. And then you would, in wrestling, you're like cutting a promo on somebody, and you start to get good at it, and then everyone like claps at the end because you do it in front of like your class, and there's like 30, 40 people in this 30, maybe 20 or 30 people in a class. And they clap and they get all fired up because you said something funny or made fun of somebody else, and they, give you like fist bumps and stuff. And then, when that class starts going, you're kind of like, oh, I hope coach calls on me first because like I'm ready to fucking rock. I got good ammo.
Yeah.
I got good ammo for today. It's like a rap battle, and you're like confident that you're gonna do well in that. So you can take something like that and you can kind of completely flip it upside down on its head. What I was gonna say earlier is like the shaking and stuff that you may do in a situation like that. Like sometimes, I'm a big fan of the show Shark Tank, and sometimes the person goes to show their product and they're shaking, and man, like they're under the lights, they're on big time television right there, and that's got to be really challenging. So they get real shaky. But what happens from a hard workout? What happens from a heavy workout? That input into the nervous system makes you shaky. You're trying to drive home, and you're like moving all weird and like spazzing out, especially from like particular powerlifting workouts. So it's really simulation, is what it is. Lifting is like simulation for a lot of other things in life. And, if I can stick myself into a spot that's like super hot, stuff myself into a sauna, or stay in my hot tub for a little longer, or if I could stay in go in a cold plunge or make it a little colder, if I can even make the cold plunge less comfortable, like I've been dunking my head underneath more recently, or at the very least, just like at least like splashing my face with the water before I get out of it. I haven't tried this one before, but it's in one of the books that we have over here by George Hackenschmidt, and he talks about like after you get out of like they didn't have a cold plunge back then, but after you get out of a cold body of water, to stand in front of a fan.
Oh, man.
So you're just like, you're just compounding stuff and just making everything. Again, I'm not suggesting that like you have to make everything like you start sleeping on a bed of nails and stuff like that. I'm not saying, but like these things, you can feel it. Like when you do these things and accomplish these things, you can feel it. And now, like instead of just like resuming my day after a cold plunge and drying off, I warm myself back up with a lot of exercise. So I do like a lot of squats. Today I did 2 sets of 50 squats and my legs were just burning. And I'll just do like toe touches, like almost like a deadlift. I'll do some like jumping jack type things. And, it takes a little while to get yourself warm. But not only do I get warm from that, I get warm and I stay there rather than like freezing my ass off the rest of the day.
Yeah. Wind, or if my son sees that I'm in the cold plunge and he just, like, he loves water. I don't know if all kids like water, but like he just freaking, anytime there's anything he can play in, he'll do it. And like he doesn't care. Like, I don't know, babies, toddlers, they just have no, like, they don't care if something's ice cold. They're still just like, cool. He'll like splash. And dude, that makes it like 10 times worse for me. Like, I already don't like getting in the cold plunge.
Yeah,
it's
any
really
movement.
difficult. But that, and then like just the splashing of the face, and then the wind and all that stuff, it just like, wow, like, please just stop. Super annoying.
He's trying to make you more resilient.
He is. Yeah. I mean, shit, if there's one person on the planet that has, it's him. Because
Shout out, it really is.
I had to get very resilient in all aspects of my life. But again, going back to the part where like humans wanted to like conserve the energy and stuff, and you keep saying that like it shouldn't be difficult. I think what you're saying is like if somebody doesn't go to the gym, going for the first time or going into a foreign place, you're not saying that shouldn't be difficult, because that's difficult for a lot of people just going to a new place. Like if I have to go to the DMV, that's freaking difficult because I don't know where to stand, and if I get the wrong number, everyone there for some reason, everybody in the whole building knows exactly what to do except me for some weird reason, right? Everybody knows. Somehow I mess it up. That's difficult for me to deal with. So I'm not saying that, going to the gym is the easy thing. But what you're saying is like that first workout shouldn't be like the most difficult workout ever. So is that what you're saying as far as like, is that the method in kind of turning off that, I guess I'll say, the will to conserve energy and kind of shut that off and be like, I'm going to go use this energy right now?
I think, if I think of just in terms of my own experiences, like I ran yesterday, and then after that, I did a workout at our new studio. And I kind of didn't really want to do the workout. I was super hungry. I was like, man, I just want to go home and like eat, But again, the way that I talk myself into these things is I rationalize it. I'm like, it's just not that hard. It's like, you go there and, spend 30 minutes in there. And I know I'm not going to spend 30. I'm going to spend 45. Like just every time I'm going to probably do a little bit more. And I do recognize for other people, like going into the gym might be difficult for them. I understand all that. It might be challenging. And they might even just say it's hard. But what I mean is like when you're there, it doesn't have to be that hard, in the sense of like your body is going to continue to get better every time that you go. So if you go and you do, let's say you do 3 sets of leg extensions and a couple sets of leg curls, well, you'll get kind of sore from that and stuff, right? The next time you go, maybe you're able to handle a little bit more the next time you go. But it's not like you don't want to be intense. It's important to bring some intensity, and it's important to go at it at a certain pace and at a certain rate and everything. But your body is going to continually adapt and adopt these inputs that you're putting into it. It's like your body won't learn stuff that it's not prepared for. Like if you try to go into like a certain class and it's, you're supposed to be in the 101 class and you're in the 102 class, you can't really pick up some of the stuff that they're saying because you haven't completed the first course in the first place. And the same thing happens with training. Like you could very easily overdo it and make things harder on yourself. But I'm saying like, don't go that route, because the single most important thing to your success is consistency, not intensity. Intensity is something that you could work on down the road. Even thinking of my own journey, like I was always a little bit of a pussy on a lot of stuff, I was a bigger kid and I was a strong kid, but I wasn't ever aggressive or anything like that. And I always just kind of like took my time with stuff, and it ended up working out really well. But if you're somebody that's like watching some of these YouTube videos and some of these Instagram posts where people are talking about, these very specific intensities for hypertrophy, otherwise you're wasting your time. Well, it really depends. And so the information that we have about hypertrophy, of like, brushing up next to failure and all these things, those things are completely irrelevant when you're new. When you're new, like this is all a new stimulus. So how many sets of curls is it going to take for you to be better than you are right now when you previously don't do any curls? One set, one or two sets is going to start to elicit like a little bit of a response. And yes, maybe it's not enough, and maybe you need to learn that. Maybe over time you start to do a little bit more. But there's time to do that, and you want to give yourself time. And the time that you spend doing these things, you want the input to be really positive. You want the input of what it is that you're doing to feel good, and you want to associate good feelings with what you're doing. And if you go in too fast and go too crazy, most likely you're going to give yourself a little bit more negative inputs. So that's kind of the way I've always viewed it. There hasn't been, I'm just trying to even really think of like, kind of like the way that I like to think about this is like anything that you can do consistently just doesn't need to be that difficult in terms of like the intensity of it. It doesn't need to be that hard. Now, again, you're going to like trickle that up over time, but your body's going to go right along with it. And, our bodies are, our body is like a supercomputer. Like what you put into it, you're going to get out of it. And actually the body is actually always trying to go back to baseline. That's how weird it is. Mm-hmm. Like you train, you bring up your trainability. Like you're lifting, and you stop lifting, and where you go right back down to like the baseline of where you were before. You run and you bring up your endurance, and you're running, and I can run 3 miles, I can run 9 miles, I can run 20 miles, and so on. And then you stop running and it goes right back down the other side. And it will always kind of like fight for you to go back to that baseline if the inputs aren't there. But when the inputs are there, you'll continually get better.
Mm-hmm. And then also, in the moment, everything seems a little difficult, right? But then when you look back, it's like, oh, you know what? That actually wasn't as bad as I made it out to be. Pretty much, I'm sure that like freaking Boston Marathon, that was probably difficult in the moment, but eventually you're going to level up, and then you'll be able to obviously beat your times, but you'll be able to like comfortably run a marathon, right?
That's the best way to look at it right there. You summed it up. Now see, like something like a marathon is preset on how long and how far you have to go. Mm-hmm. So you have to have, in that case, you have to build a capacity that's well above and beyond what you're asked to do, so you can walk away from that day and not feel completely fucked up. But in normal cases where you're just training yourself and you're just trying to get a little bit better, that's off the table. That's my point, is that there's no like hard rule. There's no preset anything. You want to, you're 25% body fat and you want to just look better. The best thing for you to do is to start to work your way towards 20%. How much effort, how much work, when you haven't been doing much of that work and that hasn't been a focus of yours, how hard does it need to be? With diet, you need to go from, your diet is a 3 on a scale of 1 to 10. Your diet needs to move to like a 5. You haven't been exercising at all, and now you're going to start to walk. You haven't been doing any lifting, and you're gonna start to implement, lifting like twice a week. Where's your lifting need to be on a scale of 1 to 10? It could be like 2, because you don't normally lift. Mm-hmm. You don't normally walk, so you don't have to walk fast. You can just stroll. Mm-hmm. It's all these things are new. And, to kind of get back on topic of what it was that we were talking about, is that originally, this podcast started out by us talking about you choosing the thing that you don't want to do. And I do think that it's important to have some difficulty to some of those things, because that's an extra hurdle, but that's like extra credit. And that's after you get yourself to do some of the things that you don't normally want to do when you don't normally want to do them. Strength is never a weakness. Weakness is never a strength. Thank you guys so much for following along, and give us some questions so we can have another amazing power project. Catch you guys later. Bye.
Thank you for checking out this edition of Mark Bell Saturday School. We talked about willpower and kind of going through some troubling times. Nobody went through more troubling times than our boy, Luke Hawk. He has an amazing story where he himself says he wasn't meant to be anything more than like lower than the dirt on the bottom of your shoes. Really amazing story. I think you guys will get a lot of value out of it. Click it right now and enjoy. Catch you guys later. Peace.